Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries.
We are launching into a deep dive today, and this one is...
There, no, it's a big one.
It really is. We're focusing on a book that gives you a completely different lens for looking at your own persistent struggles. It's Mark Wolynn's guide, the official It Didn't Start With You workbook.
It's just such an essential book. I mean, not just if you're actively seeking healing, but really for anyone who has ever looked at their life and just wondered, why do I feel this way?
Right. Why does this keep happening to me?
Exactly. And our mission in this deep dive is to really synthesize his approach. It's a full workbook, so it guides you through this whole process of self-discovery.
And it shows how trauma, specifically inherited family trauma and what he calls early attachment trauma, can get, well, lodged deep inside our psyche and our bodies.
That's the core of it. The whole premise is the hook, really.
It is, isn't it? Wolynn is basically saying that so many of the chronic symptoms we struggle with, the severe anxiety, the migraines that won't go away, the self-sabotage, that inability to commit in a relationship.
All of that. He's saying they aren't necessarily rooted in our personal story alone.
Absolutely. Think about the kind of person who comes in for therapy and says, look, I have a good job, I had a stable home life, but I am just terrified of being abandoned.
Or I'm constantly expecting financial ruin, even though my bank account is fine.
Right. Their own life, their personal history, it just doesn't explain the sheer intensity of the symptom they're feeling.
And Wolynn's explanation, it often traces back to events we might just dismiss because they happened decades ago. Maybe to a grandparent.
Or a great-grandparent, even. He calls them ordinary family events. A mother losing a baby, a father going to war, a big epidemic hitting a community.
A difficult divorce that happened while we were still in the womb.
These are the events that created these huge, unexpressed emotions in the family system. And the core insight, really, is that whatever painful feelings we suppress or fail to resolve, they don't just vanish.
They don't just disappear.
No. They go dormant, they submerge, and then they pop back up generations later as these symptoms that we can't logically explain. We're carrying feelings that started with someone else.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is a huge idea. The concept that my chronic, debilitating anxiety might actually be my ancestors' fear of starvation, just filtered down through the generations. It's so counterintuitive.
It is.
If it's not my fear, how can it feel so viscerally, physically real in my body? We really need to understand the mechanism here.
And that's where the science comes in. What's fascinating here is how this field, transgenerational trauma, connects that emotional suffering to actual concrete biological changes.
This is the central concept in the book.
It is. Wolynn's whole argument is that the immediate gut-level reaction to a trauma, the stress response, the feeling of danger, all the physical sensations, it doesn't just stop with the person who first experienced it.
So we're not just talking about, say, a kid learning to be anxious from an anxious parent. That's modeling. This is something else.
This is much, much deeper. This is something written into the physical data stream of the next generation.
Wow.
Wolynn talks about how these profound, unresolved memories of trauma can become physically imprinted in the very cells that pass life on the sperm and egg cells.
This is in the biology from the very beginning.
From the very beginning. It means the next generation can inherit not just a tendency to react, but the physical preparedness for a threat that is purely historical. It's not in their present reality at all.
That sounds like something out of science fiction, but it's anchored in a very real and pretty new area of study. Epigenetics.
Right. And we hear that term a lot, so it's important to be clear what it means and what it doesn't mean.
Okay.
It is not about changing your underlying DNA code itself.
That's the key difference, right? The fundamental blueprint of who you are, your DNA sequence, that stays the same.
Exactly. Epigenetics literally means above the gene. It's the study of how that blueprint gets expressed. It's like the instruction manual that's layered on top of the DNA.
And Wolynn uses a brilliant analogy for this, the dimmer switch.
It's the perfect analogy. Think of your genes as light switches. When a trauma is severe enough, it causes these little information-rich molecules, they're called methyl groups, to literally latch onto the DNA strands.
Okay, so they stick to the DNA.
They stick to it, and they act like dimmer switches. They control the volume, they tell certain genes to turn on, others to turn off, and crucially, how loudly those genes should speak.
So a gene that manages cortisol, the stress hormone, might get permanently turned up to high.
Perpetually. The switch is set to high alert because of something that happened 50, 100 years ago, and that setting gets passed down.
This brings up a really important question when I'm sure you're thinking about, What makes a trauma significant enough to actually change biology like that?
Yeah.
Everyone's life has stress.
That's a fair question. And the book points to the scientific consensus that the trauma exposure needs to be, and this is the quote, dramatic enough, long enough, and serious enough.
So not just a bad week at work.
Definitely not. We're talking about life-altering, sustained stress. Surviving a famine, living under constant threat in a war zone, or, the long-term loss of a parent in childhood.
Things that would fundamentally change how your body operates.
Yes. If the event is big enough to change the function of the parent's genes, that biological shift can predispose the child to be hypersensitive to similar themes, even without the original event happening to them.
And the consequence for us, the descendants, is this nervous system that's just always running, always hypervigilant.
We inherit a kind of survival skill set that we absolutely do not need.
It's completely mismatched to our current life.
Exactly. Descendants can be born with what are effectively altered brains. Nervous systems that are perpetually calibrated for danger. Imagine your ancestors survived a war.
Okay.
They needed sharper reflexes, an instant fight or flight response, a constant low-level alertness. Biologically, that was a huge advantage. It kept them alive.
But when we inherit that stress response, it's like the internal dials are permanently set to 10, and we're just waiting for a catastrophe that isn't coming.
It leaves the autonomic nervous system stuck in sympathetic mode, switched on. And the tragedy is that our modern nervous system can't tell the difference between the unsafe past, the ancestors' trauma, and our relatively safe present.
So we feel this intense anxiety or panic, and we think it's about the traffic jam we're in, or an email from our boss.
We misattribute it. We assume it's just how we're wired. And we are wired, yes, but we're wired by our lineage, not just our own life experience.
It's so important to ground this in the actual science. The book cites some really compelling research that's hard to ignore.
The research is still growing, but what we have is profound. Studies on the children of genocide survivors from the Holocaust, from Rwanda, Cambodia, they've shown clinical evidence of epigenetic changes linked to PTSD in the children.
Even though they were never anywhere near the original events.
That's the incredible part. It strongly implies a direct biological inheritance of that trauma response.
And it's not just these huge historical events. We see it with adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs.
Absolutely. There was a big study in 2018. It focused on men who had high levels of ACEs, things like neglect, abuse, dysfunction in the home.
What did they find?
They found that the higher the man's ACE score was, the more likely he was to pass on these altered RNA profiles in his sperm to his kids. And that alteration was directly linked to higher rates of anxiety in their children.
Wow.
And another study from 2017 found that daughters of mothers who had experienced trauma in their own childhood were significantly more likely to struggle with depression and bipolar disorder themselves.
It's just a stunning persistence of stress right across the generations. So the big question is, how long can this last? We always hear about the studies on mice.
Right, and that raises the longevity question. The research in humans is still young because our generation gap is about 20 years, which makes studies really long.
Of course.
But Wolynn notes that in animal studies, they've demonstrated stress transmission for up to 5 generations in mice. If that pattern holds for us.
5 generations. We could be talking about biological scars stretching back 100 years or more.
100 years. The stress of the Great Depression or major wars could theoretically still be whispering to our genes today.
That knowledge just instantly transforms how you think about healing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You have to look backward, up the family tree, instead of just assuming all your issues are some kind of personal failure.
You're forced to become a kind of archaeologist of your own history, because understanding the context of the trauma, who it happened to and when, that's the first step to releasing the pattern.
So that's inherited family trauma, these historical wounds. Now let's pivot to the second major category Wolynn talks about, attachment trauma. How do we draw a clear line between these two?
It's a great question because they're often connected. While inherited trauma often comes from these big external events, attachment trauma is specifically about an internal relational dynamic. It's a break in the attachment with the primary caregiver.
Usually the mother.
Almost always the mother, especially in those very early critical windows of development. But here's how they link. The inherited biological scars from an ancestor can actually compromise the mother's ability to be present and attuned.
Which then makes an attachment break more likely in her child's life.
Exactly. Can I give you an example?
Please.
Okay, let's say a great-grandparent was orphaned and suffered extreme neglect. Their child, your grandparent, grows up with this fundamental sense of emotional scarcity.
Right. They didn't get what they needed.
So that affects their ability to be emotionally safe for their own child, who is your mother. Your mother, in turn, might be physically present, but she's emotionally anxious or disengaged. She's passing the effect of the original trauma forward as an attachment break.
And the symptoms that result from that tend to be really focused on identity and self-worth, right?
Precisely. You see social anxiety, deep trust issues, problems with boundaries, fear of intimacy, or just this deep-seated feeling of being rejected or unworthy of love. The symptoms are all about the self in relation to others, which is exactly what that early bond with the mother creates the blueprint for.
The book really emphasizes that critical period for establishing that blueprint. It starts in the womb and goes through the first 2 or 3 years.
That period is absolutely crucial. It's when our basic neural circuitry is being wired. Wolynn has this great line where he says, the mother is essentially installing the operating software for our well-being.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it.
Isn't it? So if that caregiving is unsafe or unpredictable between birth and about 24 months, it has severe neurodevelopmental consequences. The brain just wires itself for self-protection and defensiveness. Survival over connection.
The idea of a traumatic womb experience is really unsettling because the fetus is just so completely dependent.
It's a huge piece of this. Our physical heart, our nervous system, it's all forming in those first few weeks of pregnancy. The fetus is deeply somatically aware of the mother's internal world.
So if the mother's under immense stress,
A divorce, constant money worries, fear of abandonment that floods the fetus with stress hormones, it literally creates a traumatic experience in the womb.
so the fetus's first response to life is already one of anxiety.
Yes, it can only adapt epigenetically. It learns right away to create strategies to avoid feeling pain or, annihilation. And that can result in a child who is born already highly sensitive, anxious, or a bit closed off, just because the environment inside the womb signaled danger.
The key to preventing this, or at least fixing it, is something called attunement. Can you break that down for us?
Attunement is the mother's ability to see and reflect the child's experience back to them. The baby cries, the mother's face shows concern, the baby coos, she smiles back.
It's a mirroring process.
It's a mirroring process that builds a fundamental sense of safety, worth, and belonging. It fills what he calls the child's reservoir of good stuff. When that bond flows, the world feels abundant.
But the reality is that bond gets interrupted all the time.
It does, and that interruption creates a rift. And that rift can become the child's default setting. Fear, scarcity, distrust.
But it's not about being a perfect parent, is
Well,
it?
not at all. This
Yeah.
is so important. Psychologists suggest a mother only needs to be in sync about 30% of the time for a secure attachment. The critical part is the repair,
The coming back.
the coming back and soothing the child after a break. That's what builds trust and resilience. It's the continual, unrepaired breaks that do the damage.
And the damage from those early breaks is magnified because of how our memory works, or doesn't work at that age.
That's a profound point. The hippocampus, the part of the brain that stores explicit narrative memory, isn't fully online until around age 3.
So you can't remember what happened.
You can't consciously remember it. You can't put words to the fear or the anxiety of that early break. Instead, those unfulfilled longings for safety, for comfort, they distort your reality later in life.
So a small issue in the present feels catastrophic.
Exactly. Your partner is late coming home, and it doesn't just feel annoying, it feels life-threatening because it triggers that infant's terror of abandonment. And those old longings come out as urges or cravings we try to satisfy with, workaholism or shopping. We're trying to fill a relational void from when we were 2.
The case study of Susan in the book is just such a powerful illustration of how this all comes together. The inherited trauma, the attachment trauma, and a physical symptom.
It's a perfect example. Susan came to Wolynn with 2 main issues. A lot of distance in her romantic relationships and this strange, debilitating physical problem, a frozen shoulder and lost dexterity on her left side.
And emotionally.
She felt chronically overwhelmed, responsible for everyone, and just unable to receive love or help from anyone.
So they started mapping her history, beginning with her mother's pregnancy. What did they find out?
Well, her mother, after some hesitation, revealed this history of loss. She'd had 2 late-term miscarriages before Susan was born, and then a 3rd late-term loss when Susan was 2 years old.
Oh, wow. So that was the key.
That was the key. Susan had experienced 2 massive attachment breaks she had no conscious memory of at all.
So the first one was in the womb?
The first was prenatal. Her mother was just saturated with terror for the whole 9 months, constantly afraid she would lose this baby too. That fear flooded Susan's developing nervous system.
And the second break.
The second happened when she was 2, a critical age. Her mother was, naturally, consumed by overwhelming grief and emotional distance after that third miscarriage. It created this profound, unrepaired break in attunement right when Susan needed it most.
And her body was holding that story. The frozen shoulder was a metaphor.
A perfect nonverbal representation. Wolynn suggested her body was literally shouldering the burden of all this multi-generational grief and anxiety all by herself.
Her inability to receive was mirrored in her body.
Yes. The physical blockage mirrored the emotional blockage. It's just a phenomenal example of how the body speaks what the mind can't remember.
The Susan case just perfectly sets up why the core language approach is so necessary. If the symptoms aren't ours, we need a special tool to find their origin.
The core language map is that investigative tool. It works because trauma has a specific, identifiable language. We're listening for that familial echo.
And the approach recognizes 2 different types of language, right? The first is verbal.
Verbal core language. This is made up of intense, urgent words or phrases that just feel out of proportion to your current life. They sound dramatic, maybe a bit strange.
So you have to listen with a meta ear, as he puts it.
You have to listen for the story underneath the complaint. And then the second type is nonverbal core language.
Which is the symptoms themselves.
Exactly. The depression, the self-destructive behaviors, the chronic relationship problems, the physical illnesses. They're like a breadcrumb trail leading right back to the original traumatic event in the family.
So the whole process starts with step 1, identifying the core complaint.
This is the issue that brings you to the work in the first place. The relationship problems, the chronic pain. And it's important to frame it in the exact language the person uses.
So for Susan, it was about feeling overwhelmed and disconnected.
And that language mirrored the infant's experience. Feeling overwhelmed, not connected, unable to trust anyone to take care of her.
It's just fascinating how symptoms aren't random. They're actually creative expressions trying to help us.
They are powerful signposts. Wolynn argues that our nonverbal complaints are often trying to force growth or separation or just draw our attention to a part of our history that's been suppressed.
Like the example of the people pleaser.
Right, the person who is so exhausted from giving to everyone that their exhaustion becomes a debilitating symptom. But that exhaustion is functioning as the boundary they couldn't set for themselves. The complaint is the map.
And once that complaint is on the map, we move to step 2, core descriptors, which is about our parents.
This is where we describe our mother and father. And critically, it's not just about the love they gave us, but also the love they received from their own parents. We're looking for patterns.
So what did Susan say about her mother?
She described her as outgoing, successful, always there, but busy, not emotionally present. And she added this really telling detail. Her mother's attention felt way too close, like she was crawling inside me.
That feeling of being both loved and intruded upon,
Yeah.
that's a huge clue.
A huge clue that leads right to the grandmother's generation, because when Susan described her mother's mother, she used the words distant and disconnected.
And why was she distant?
Because her mother, Susan's great-grandmother, had died in childbirth when the grandmother was just 2 years old.
Wow.
That massive trauma, that sudden motherlessness, it just set up this multi-generational pattern of attachment breaks. Susan's own resistance to closeness was an inherited defense against her mother's anxious, intrusive love, a love that was only so needy because the mother was subconsciously terrified of abandonment herself.
This really shines a light on how we project things onto our partners, doesn't it?
It's the primary mechanism. The unresolved feelings toward our parents become the unconscious template for our romantic relationships. If you felt unseen by your mother, you will find a way to feel unseen by your partner, even if they're trying their best.
Our complaints about our partner are often just echoes of our descriptions of our parents.
They often are. Which brings us to step 3, the core sentence. This is the heart of the map. It's the life sentence that seems to lock us in. But once you find it, it's also the way out.
The diamond in the map.
That's what he calls it. It's your absolute worst fear, your deepest despair, and it usually starts with I will or they will. It's a traveling sentence, passed down energetically, knocking on the psyches of the descendants.
And when someone finds their true core sentence, there's a physical reaction.
Yes, Wolynn says it hits more like a ping on crystal than a thud on wood. There's this moment of recognition.
So Susan's sentence was,
I'll be annihilated. The sheer drama of that word annihilated was just so out of proportion to her adult life, but it was the perfect primal cry of the fetus experiencing the absolute terror of its mother's fear of loss in the womb.
A threat to existence itself.
Exactly. And then you have Jordan, whose sentence was all about guilt.
Right, he had severe anxiety and this obsessive fear of harming someone close to him.
And his core sentence was, I'll do something terrible and harm someone I care about, and it will all be my fault.
A sentence like that, full of blame and responsibility, immediately points to a different kind of story.
It immediately suggests he's merged with a family member who either caused harm or carried profound responsibility for a tragedy in the past.
So the core sentence doesn't just identify the fear, it can also point to the original owner.
And even the type of trauma. If the sentence is, I'll be helpless and powerless, it almost always points back to an infant or fetal trauma when you really were helpless. If it's, they'll forget me, it might link to an ancestor who died young or was excluded from the family story. The sentence tells you whose script you're running.
To really figure out whose story it is, we have to map the whole system. This brings us to the genogram. And this is more than just a family tree, isn't it?
Oh, much more. A genogram uses standardized symbols, squares for males, circles for females, to map out not just births and deaths, but the significant traumas and difficult fates over 3 or more generations.
So you include things like early deaths, suicides.
Suicides, stillbirths, crimes, addictions, anyone who is institutionalized, major war experiences, even significant prior partners of your parents who might have been forgotten.
The philosophy behind this comes from the work of Bert Hellinger and this idea of unconscious loyalty.
Unconscious loyalty is this profound, invisible force that's trying to maintain order in the family system.
Oh.
And its core rule is that everyone belongs. No one can be excluded.
Not the alcoholic uncle, not the stillborn baby who was never named.
Not the criminal, not the victim. Everyone has a right to their place.
And if someone is excluded or forgotten, the system tries to balance the books.
Absolutely. The system demands balance. So if a relative is pushed out of the family's heart or their story, a later member of the family is very likely to identify with them unconsciously and repeat their fate or carry their suffering.
It's an attempt to restore wholeness to the system.
That's exactly what it is. And we see this so clearly with the case of Ellie.
Her fear was, I'll go crazy.
A dramatic, intense fear she carried with her all the time. Her genogram eventually led back to a great aunt who was institutionalized at a young age, died alone, and was then just never spoken of again.
A total exclusion from the family story.
Total exclusion. Ellie was unconsciously carrying the burden of that silence and the fear of that isolation. Just speaking the great aunt's name and including her started to lift the pressure off Ellie.
And Jordan, the man with the guilt-ridden core sentence.
His sentence required homework. He had to go looking for who in the family might have carried this immense, unresolved guilt for harming someone or for a death. And often these entanglements involve age repetition.
Meaning the trauma might have happened to the ancestor at the same age Jordan is now.
It's a very common pattern. It required him to do the hard work of digging into his family history to find the original owner of that self-blaming sentence.
The book breaks these dynamics down into 4 main ways we merge with the past through this unconscious loyalty. The first one is, I'll follow you.
This is often the most tragic one. The child attempts an early death, maybe through addiction or reckless behavior, as an unconscious attempt to follow or join a parent or sibling who died young.
It's like an internal vow. Since you left, I can't fully live.
Yes. The second one is, I'll share it with you.
This is where the child refuses to be more successful or happier than a suffering parent.
Right. Despite all their talent, they keep repeating a parent's misfortune. Financial failure, bad health, unhappy relationships. The loyalty says, I cannot have more than you did.
The third is, I'll do it in your place. This is about carrying unprocessed emotion for the family.
The child becomes the intergenerational emotional sponge. They take on the feelings the parent couldn't handle. If you can't feel your grief, I'll feel it for both of us. Or, if you secretly want to die, I'll become depressed in your place.
They carry the burden of the parent's unexpressed wish.
They do. And finally, there's a really complex one. Rejecting a parent. This seems so counterintuitive because we often reject a parent for very good reasons.
Because they're hurtful.
And yet, Wolynn stresses this is profoundly limiting. Our life force, our vitality, it comes from both parents. When we push a parent away, even a difficult one, we are also rejecting a part of ourselves and blocking that flow of life.
And that rejection gets projected onto our partners.
Onto partners, it leads to harsh self-criticism, and it makes us unconsciously reenact those dynamics on ourselves. The path to being whole requires, internally at least, embracing both parents.
And it's important to remember that even siblings who share the same trauma might express it completely differently.
Absolutely. The trauma is shared, but the coping mechanism is individual. One sibling becomes the rigid high achiever, terrified of being vulnerable. The other becomes the conflict creator, always pushing people away.
And there's often resentment between them.
A painful dynamic, especially when an older child resents a younger one because they consciously remember the younger one getting attention they feel they missed out on, because their own memories from that early age aren't explicit. We all carry some residue.
If we connect all this to the bigger picture, it becomes so clear that our unhealed relationship with our parents really is the ultimate template for our adult relationships.
It is. We want to believe that love conquers all, but these deep, unconscious loyalties often conquer our ability to really sustain intimacy and connection.
That's a powerful and honestly a slightly disheartening thought.
Yeah.
The book details 20 of these invisible dynamics that can erode intimacy. Let's touch on a few of the most common ones.
We can start with the most basic one, dynamic one, where the unfinished business with your mother just repeats with your partner. If your mother made you feel unseen, you'll find partners who make you feel unseen.
Because it feels like home.
Even though it's a painful home. Then there's the person who always has to be the caregiver in their relationships.
Right. What's that dynamic?
That links to dynamic 5, taking care of a parent's feelings as a child. If you were the emotional support for an anxious parent, you learn to give too much. So later, you either give too much to your partner and get resentful,
Or you do the opposite.
or you become emotionally blocked and pull away the second your partner shows any real need because you're terrified you'll be swallowed whole again.
And some of these dynamics are so complex, so suggesting we're carrying burdens for people we never even met.
Like dynamic 8, atoning for a parent who jilted a former partner. The descendant, say a granddaughter, might unconsciously carry the guilt for her grandfather leaving his fiancé, so she might atone by staying alone or having repeated relationship failures.
She's sharing the fate of the person who was jilted.
Exactly. Or dynamic 9, which is joining a parent in their brokenheartedness. If your parent never got over a lost love, you might unconsciously mimic that by losing your first love or feeling perpetually incomplete with the partner you have now.
And the dynamics where a child was pulled into the space between the parents are also incredibly common.
Oh, yes. Dynamic 18, being the mother's confidant or emotional partner. This child spent their early years trying to meet the mother's needs that weren't being met by the father.
And the result, later in life.
A profound difficulty committing. They fear that any partner, like their mother, will just need too much and suffocate them. This can lead to emotional shutdown or, in men, becoming a womanizer, leaving a trail of broken hearts because they just can't tolerate real intimacy.
Then there's aligning with the parent who is seen as the oppressor.
Dynamic 14. If your parents were locked in a victim-oppressor dynamic, it can be incredibly hard for you to be happier than either of them. You align with the suffering of one, and you sabotage your own ability to find peace.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's shift this to career and financial success. We're always taught that success is just about strategy and hard work. But how does this web of family loyalty act as a roadblock to abundance?
It's like a hidden leak in the tank. It undermines even the best strategies. The relationship with our parents is fundamentally a metaphor for life's abundance. If you feel you were shortchanged by your parents,
You'll unconsciously feel shortchanged by life.
and you'll limit your own opportunities or put a ceiling on your income.
Wolynn makes a surprisingly direct link between the mother-child bond and money.
He says it so powerfully. An infant's wealth is a mother's focused attention. When that attention is there, secure and consistent, the infant feels abundance. When it's not, the break in the bond, the infant registers a kind of emotional bankruptcy.
And that feeling of scarcity carries over into finances.
It can translate directly into a disconnection from safety, security, and financial abundance. You feel like you never have enough no matter what your actual income is.
And those unconscious loyalty dynamics, they show up here as clear self-sabotage.
Constantly. You see the unconscious loyalty to failure. People sabotage their success to avoid surpassing a parent who struggled in business. I must stay at your level.
Or the legacy of unfinished business.
Right. If a family member died young and didn't complete their life's work, the descendant might always procrastinate, never finish their degree, stop just short of a major goal. It's a loyalty to that early death.
And there's also an economic loyalty tied to past poverty.
This often affects descendants of refugees or famine survivors. We carry an unconscious allegiance with impoverished ancestors, making it feel like a profound betrayal to have more than they did.
That feeling of, I don't deserve
There's
this.
often a historical echo. And finally, there's the shadow of personal guilt.
When wealth was acquired unethically.
Yes. If someone in the family got rich by cheating or manipulating, the consequence is that their children often live these strangely meager lives or unconsciously squander the money as a way to balance the harm that was done. The system always seeks balance.
After detailing all of this struggle, the overwhelming message of the book is one of hope. This is not a life sentence. We can reverse these patterns.
That is the good news. Neuroscience absolutely confirms this potential. We know that researchers have reversed trauma symptoms in animals through positive experiences, and the same principles apply to us. Focused attention and repeating new positive experiences creates new neural pathways.
And it physically changes the brain.
It physically changes the brain. It stimulates the release of neurotransmitters like serotonin and oxytocin. It can actually shrink the hyperactive amygdala, the brain's fear center, and thicken the prefrontal cortex, which handles emotional regulation.
We are changing how our DNA expresses itself through conscious action.
We are. And that healing starts with language. We use healing sentences and rituals to counteract that old core sentence.
So what does a healing sentence sound like?
They're conscious affirmations designed to release the unconscious loyalty. Things like, I see you and I will honor the life you gave me by doing something good with it. Or simply, now I understand where this comes from, and it helps to understand.
And the rituals are there to make that shift physical, to anchor it.
Exactly. A ritual provides a physical focal point. If you're entangled with the grandparents' guilt, you might put their photo on your desk and practice visualizing breathing out that guilt, consciously leaving the burden with them while keeping the love.
Or lighting a candle for a father who died young.
As a way to reunite with him internally and open a path for his life force to flow through you, unburdened by the tragedy of his fate.
Let's focus on healing that mother-child bond, because it seems to be the foundation for so much.
It's absolutely critical. Wolynn offers a specific ritual for this. Place a photo of your mother by your bed, over your left shoulder, which energetically represents the feminine line.
And what are the sentences that go with that?
It's about the silent, internal dialogue. Looking at the photo, you might say internally, Mom, I know you carried so much pain, and it must have been so hard to give what you couldn't receive.
And then, crucially,
You silently say, Mom, please hold me while I'm sleeping, so we can heal the bond that broke between us. This simple, repeated visualization creates a new, safe inner image of connection.
but because the original trauma was registered in the body before we even had words for it, the healing has to be physical. It has to be somatic.
Somatic healing is non-negotiable. The memory lives in the nervous system's fight-or-flight response. You have to be willing to locate the physical sensations, the tightness, the sinking, the numbness, and just practice being with them without reacting.
You're signaling safety to the most primitive part of your brain.
That's it. And the core technique for this is the I've got you practice.
So how does that work?
It's powerful and simple. You locate the unsettling sensation, that knot in your solar plexus, that ache in your heart. You place your hands gently there. You breathe deeply, and you visualize that breath soothing a small, vulnerable part of you.
And you talk to that part.
You internally repeat the healing sentences. I've got you. I'm here with you. I'll breathe with you until you feel safe. You become the loving, attuned presence that the infant part of you never had.
And the real secret to making this work, to making it last, is about repetition and holding the positive feeling that comes after.
Exactly. The brain needs new evidence of safety. Once the knot subsides, you have to focus on the positive sensations that result. The warmth, the lightness, the expansion, and you have to hold that positive feeling for at least a full minute.
And do it often.
The goal is 6 times a day. That repetition is what floods the system with safety, calms the amygdala, and literally starts to reset those epigenetic dimmer switches.
Susan's story is the perfect proof of this. Her internal work changed her physical reality.
By focusing on that ache in her heart and holding the resulting sensation of expansion, her body finally registered safety. The sense of burden lessened, and within weeks of practice, the frozen shoulder, the physical manifestation of her burden, began to release. She could finally receive help and connection.
We have to address the most sensitive part of this.
Yeah.
Reconciliation with parents who caused real harm, who were abusive. How can that be anything other than a surrender?
Wolynn is very clear that reconciliation is primarily an internal movement. It is 100% an inside job. It is not dependent on the parent changing or apologizing or even being alive.
So how do you do it?
Healing happens by visualizing the parent's higher self, the part of them that would have given more if their own trauma hadn't incapacitated them.
So the goal isn't necessarily forgiveness. It's more about softening.
Softening the hardness toward them, yes. The key is to own the qualities you share with them. If your father was distant, you acknowledge that you carry his capacity for distance, and you consciously choose to transform that into presence.
If you reject the parent, you reject the energy they gave you.
Which limits your life force. You transform what is by choosing to honor the vital energy they passed on, despite their flaws. A healing sentence might be, "I'm so sorry for how distant I've been internally," or "I promise to take in your love as you give it, not as I expected it to be."
So what does this all mean? The core insight of this book is that your chronic fears, your debilitating symptoms, they may have been inherited, but they are absolutely not a fixed personal failure.
Right. And by building your core language map, your complaint, descriptors, and sentence, and uncovering those entanglements, you gain the insight you need to stop the cycle.
It means we can break the cycle for future generations.
It means we honor the past not by repeating its suffering, but by using the life we were given to do something good. The trauma is always seeking a positive resolution, and it will keep repeating until that expansion happens.
Which brings us to that final powerful ritual, standing in your own footsteps.
It's a symbolic act. You use 6 pairs of shoes to represent your parents and their parents, and you place them physically behind you, mother's line on the left, father's on the right. It's a moment of deep respect for their journey.
And
Then you step forward into your own pair of shoes, which you've placed in front of something life-giving, like a window. And in that moment, you draw up your own life force, unencumbered by the weight of their journeys, that feeling of sovereignty and expansion. That's the true journey home to yourself.
we've established that rejecting a parent, even a difficult one, is like rejecting a part of ourselves which limits our life force. And the healing, as you said, is an inside job.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. If healing with your parents relies on acknowledging the life they gave you and embracing the qualities you inherited, what single internal image, small positive memory, or quality of your most difficult parent could you choose to honor today? Knowing that embracing that small aspect of them is the ultimate way to embrace your own whole, vital, and unburdened existence. Go forth and discover whose story you are truly telling.